Once upon a time, this image was shared across the internet. It's simple. There is an entry portal located on a falling platform with a cube underneath it. Once the cube enters the falling portal, what happens? This video is not an introductory one. If you don't have a baseline understanding of physics or relativity, you'll probably struggle to follow along. If you haven't seen the portal problem before, then I suggest going over to Minute Physics' portal video, watching it, and then going down to the comments and reading arguments from both sides. Then once you've made up your mind, come back here and see how you've done. So, is it option A or is it option B? Good question. First of all, this is a really tough question. Here's something that doesn't obey the laws of physics. How do you think it's going to act according to the laws of physics? Portals are weird, and they can basically act however you like, and thus, well, can function basically any outcome that you like, which almost makes this entire question pointless, because doesn't that mean anything can be anything? But not necessarily. I think there's a general consensus on how a portal should work. It should be a non-interfering doorway that lets objects pass through it as if the portal wasn't there at all. This is how they work in the Portal series, Rick and Morty, and Doctor Strange, just to name a few mainstream examples. So we should be looking for a portal that acts according to this general consensus. I've seen a whole slew of arguments for and against each side, but I think you can condense answer A into: the cube has no momentum. The portal is not pushing the cube, therefore it retains no momentum and falls straight to the floor. Then here's how you would condense option B. The exit speed of the cube is determined by how fast the portal passes over it, whether that's the cube moving through the portal or the portal moving over the cube. The cube therefore has momentum and is ejected out the other side because the portal moves over the cube. There are lots of other justifications for option A and B, and C and D and D and F and G, but those will be addressed later in the video. For now, let's just focus on those two. Oh, it's going. Okay, so pretty reasonable ideas on both sides here. You know, it's not cut and dry, it's not obvious exactly who's right and who's wrong. With that said though, here's every single reason why answer A is wrong and answer B is correct, and I'm just going to go through and dismantle the fucking whole thing right now. Momentum cannot be given to an object without an outside force. True and based, no disagreements here. Two massive problems though. Portals break the laws of physics, and having the ability to give momentum without a force is kind of allowed right now because it's just kind of allowed. It's just kind of allowed because we're talking about portals and they're not real. It's magic basically, and the magic is magic. And I understand why that sounds like a problem. We shouldn't just be picking and choosing what say the fucking words on the script. Just read the fucking thing. We shouldn't just be picking and choosing what universal laws to avoid in a conversation about physics. But we kind of have to right now, and I'll explain why in a second, but more urgently is problem number 2. Option A gives the cube momentum. So the whole point is kind of null and void and moot in every single word that means nothing. If you placed a button on the other side of the blue portal, it would be pressed in both situations. It doesn't matter if the cube kind of comes out and then it falls straight down and you say it has no momentum. If there was a button right outside that blue portal, that cube is pressing it. How the fuck does a cube that doesn't have any force put to it, is supposedly stationary and supposedly fucking no inertia, no momentum, no fucking nothing? How is it pressing a button? It shouldn't be. If you're gonna stick to A, listen, if you're gonna stick to A, you gotta commit. You can't say it has no momentum, nothing's pushing it, and then subsequently it's still pushing a button. You have to say, okay, listen, it's getting some speed from somewhere, or you just go with option C, which is it gets crushed into an infinitely small plane in between the portals. Or, what was the other one? Or the orange portal, it just never goes through. The orange portal falls down, hits the cube, and then boing, it bounces off because it can't, because it breaks the laws of physics otherwise. So really all we've learned today is you can't have portals that move objects through them that don't break the laws of physics somehow. We just have to deal with it. We just have to deal with it. Sweet, you know, 1 point down, we've kind of explained that part through, and I'll come back to it in a bit, I think. But right now, let's move on to the analogies, because there are so many analogies that are used in this, because it's kind of hard to not use analogies in something like this. and I'm just going to go through and explain why the analogies aren't good. Analogies are very useful, but they are hard to get right. I particularly like the doorway analogy from A supporters. This is how it goes. I'll just read it. Maybe I'll get some fucking graphics on. I'll stand over here and we'll get some graphics. I'll say, well, you know. The portals act like a doorway moving over the cube. The cube stays stationary as it enters and exits the portal/doorway. Sleek, intuitive, sexy, but it misses a huge thing. The blue portal doesn't move. A doorway has its entrance and exit constantly moving in tandem, which is why the cube is allowed to stay where it is. A better analogy is one that accounts for this, the slinky analogy. The entrance of the slinky, we're going to do this vertically now, moves over the cube, while the exit of the slinky remains in place. Notice that because slinkies follow the laws of physics, the cube is now trapped in between the slinky. It has entered the orange portal, but it hasn't exited the exit, so it hasn't exited the blue portal. That was a weird way of saying it. It's entered, but it hasn't exited. It's covered. This is one option that would happen if you give it no momentum. It just never exits. On to the next thing. Option A doesn't make sense. The cube clearly moves out of the portal at a certain rate. So why does it suddenly stop and fall to the floor once it's exited? I can show you what I mean better by changing some of the objects and the setting. The cube is now replaced by a pillar, and the blue portal now exits into space. Here's what happens in option B. But in option A, this is how it goes. Why? What is stopping the pillar? And this is like a big problem for A. You kind of have to explain why conservation of momentum is broken. And win a Nobel Prize when you do, because fucking I don't know. Sorry, I have to cut myself off here because in the next section I have a bunch of camera issues that never got resolved and I couldn't figure out how to fix. So I'm just gonna continue where I left off. I'm just gonna go over some comments now because an argument isn't enough. You can't just have an argument, you also have to disprove all the counter arguments. So I'm gonna attempt that by going through a bunch of comments on a bunch of different videos, Reddit posts. You know, I thought there was going to be a third thing. I'm not a scientist, a physicist, or anything that ends with "ist." Except for racist, am I right? These first 4 comments are from the Minute Physics video. Option A is the correct one by any means. I don't know why anyone would even question that. Portals are just a continuation of certain space in one place on another space. They only transfer the existing mass and energy as a continuation of space. They are not some energy generating force. This comment is a bit hard to pass, but if I'm reading into this part correctly, then they don't know what a reference frame is, or conversely, they do know what a reference frame is, and the object's behavior is determined by its universal reference frame. What this means is that the object maintains its momentum relative to everything else in the universe. Over short distances, this wouldn't really matter much because most objects close to each other move at about the same speed relative to each other. But if you were to place one portal on the equator and one portal on the North Pole, then things get tricky, because someone on the equator is spinning with the Earth at 1,670 kilometers per hour, whereas someone on the North Pole isn't. Meaning that if all relative momentum is maintained, then walking through the portal on the equator would send you flying out the portal on the North Pole at 1,670 kilometers per hour. This is a cool way to think about portals, but it doesn't really support A. It could definitely look like A if the situation was favorable, but it could also result in something that looks like option B if, let's say, the cube was in a car driving at 50 kilometers per hour, or had a sufficiently different longitude coordinate than the exit portal. So not impossible, but unlikely and unsatisfying. I'm trying to find an answer that is consistent and doesn't completely change the way we presume portals to act. So a portal that flings you towards the horizon at the speed of sound doesn't really fit into what we're going for here, although still technically possible. If we want, and yes I do want, we can call this option fuck. If we want, and yes I do want, we can call this outcome option E, which depending on where the cube is placed in the universe relative to the blue portal, any outcome is basically possible. Next comment. I'd say A, mostly due to the fact that when portals are placed, you can see where the portals go. Think of them as a hula hoop being held up. Throw something through the hula hoop and the object travels through it at the same speed and velocity. Move the hula hoop fast over an object and only the hula hoop moves. So one immediately obvious flaw is the use of the door/hula hoop analogy, which again isn't a good analogy because the entry and exit of the hula hoop move in tandem, whereas in the portal problem, the entry portal and the exit portal move relative to each other. But besides that, what if I'm fucking adjusting these as if they matter at all. They're just sunglasses to make me look like a lesbian. But besides that, what I find more interesting is that they are using the same intuition that most of us have, which is that if something is moving in fast, then it will keep moving out fast. So imagine you're standing outside of the blue portal in this situation, facing straight down it. You should have no way of telling whether or not the platform is pushing the cube towards you or if the portal is falling down onto the cube. Einstein would argue that if things look the same, then they act the same. Asterisk there, that's not exactly what he fucking said, but it's good enough. This is what we call a reference frame, and is what he based his special theory of relativity upon. Option B then agrees that if they look identical, then they should act identical, and both situations have the cube flying out the other side, but option A doesn't. In option A, the cube would fly out if pushed by the platform, but only plop out if the orange portal fell onto it. This completely breaks conservation of momentum from your point of view outside the blue portal, and breaks the entire idea of inertial reference frames altogether. I knew this fucker would try and stop recording at some point. You tried to cut me off, didn't you? Ruin my flow. Next question. I think the box comes out of the sideways portal with the whole thing being stretched diagonally, similar to the squishing possibility in option A. Okay, why don't we call this one option F? I don't know how the cube would get stretched, but I like the new ideas, so why not option F? So while we're adding new outcomes, let's add option G. As the cube is exiting the blue portal, the sudden change in force shears atom-thin sheets off the cube, leaving a pile of lasagna-like sheets on the floor afterwards. So these next comments are under this post of a slightly different portal problem. The author of the post has made one small change. They've made it so that the orange portal is no longer falling, but is now stationary, and the cube is no longer stationary, but is now being pushed. This makes option B the unanimous answer. Fucking stick it, option A supporters. This Reddit post agrees with me. No. Because in changing that one small parameter, this is no longer identical to the portal problem anymore, because now the portals aren't moving double negative, because the portals are moving in tandem, which is why the option would always be option B, where the portal flies out because both of them are moving in tandem. Righto. So just keep that in mind when reading these comments, that the whole post itself is kind of a little bit wrong. It shouldn't matter too much. The momentum of the block is 0. It isn't moving. It just appears at A quickly. It doesn't gain momentum. For those that say B because it has a relative velocity, i.e. the portal isn't moving towards the cube is moving towards the portal, please explain how the cube can have two different velocities. Then they attached a sketch that shows how each end of the cube has a different velocity. The side still entering the orange portal has 0 momentum, but the side exiting does have momentum. So how does one cube have two different velocities? I could answer this in two ways. If the portal was a printer, with the orange portal scanning and deleting the cube, while the blue portal prints it out the other side, then I could say that this isn't one cube with two different velocities, but instead two half cubes with different velocities. If the portal was a wormhole, then I would say it doesn't have two velocities, but only one velocity according to the space-time bending of the wormhole. But neither of those are very satisfactory. The printer answer is a bit of a cop-out, because it's not really like, we're talking about portals, not printers. And the wormhole answer is kinda unspecific. Here's a comment that tries to explain this discrepancy, so pause and read it if you want. I would recommend it. It's definitely convincing enough for me, except I get a little lost in the last couple sentences, but from what I can tell, I think they're saying that the point of observation in the picture lacks view of the wormhole's function, thus lacking key information and leading to an incomplete and incorrect interpretation of events. This is a pretty satisfactory answer, but that's just my analysis. Someone smarter than me can easily correct me on this if they get this far. I'm kind of freeballing right now, so bear with me, but an analogy would be, what does something look like when it falls into a supermassive black hole? From what Vsauce told me, you will see the person fall slower and slower until they hit the event horizon. Then you will see them freeze and slowly redshift and fade away. Does this mean that the person never fell into the black hole? Did they actually turn red and disappear? No. Sure, what you just witnessed seemed like it broke the laws of physics, but since you lack information about the black hole's space-time bending, your observation is incomplete, and an incorrect telling of events to an extent. Because that person did fall into the black hole, and that cube is preserving its momentum, it's just that an outside observer can't exactly tell. You kinda have to be in the cube's shoes to be like, oh yeah, I'm preserving momentum right now hard. And I'm still freeballing, but I'm pretty sure this concept still applies to unmoving portals. Let's say if you place two portals on the same wall, and then you walk through them. From an outsider's perspective, this breaks conservation of momentum, because you are walking one way and then instantly change direction with no apparent forces having acted upon you. Except I think we can all agree that this interpretation is incorrect, because if you look at it from your perspective, you are just walking in a straight line, and this interpretation is the correct one because it accounts for the mechanism of the portal. Okay, so we've moved on to a different comment on a different Reddit post now, and the context for this next comment is someone explaining that the exiting cube has momentum in option A. The direct reply to this comment goes as follows. No, there are no forces acting on the box. The portals are joining two distant places in space. Then they link a YouTube video. This video explains how the portal would work. It's not applying any force to any objects. Objects enter and leave with the same momentum. Nothing is transferred from the portals to the object. This is a misinterpretation of how relativity works, again, because yes, the cube is following a space-time line, and from its perspective there are no forces acting upon it. Everything else is just moving around it, so it has zero momentum. But the cube's perspective is not the only thing that matters, because when we look at the cube we see it moving, therefore it has momentum. Yes, relativity strikes again. So, reiterating, just because you perceive yourself as having no momentum, that doesn't mean another observer agrees, so the cube can have no external forces applied to it, and it can be moving from our perspective. Done. Something that is way more funny is the video that they linked, because just watch it. It is like the perfect culmination of everything that is wrong with science communication.
A wormhole is a theoretical bridge between 2 points in space that are very far apart. So if I wanted to go from London, which is point A here, the easiest thing to do would be to travel in a straight line. However, if I could create a wormhole linking those two places, I could get to Edinburgh instantly. Basically, I could bend space and time and pop out from London straight at Edinburgh. So a wormhole would allow faster than light travel. But actually, the practicalities of making one is incredibly difficult. You might need something called exotic matter, and this is matter that's actually got negative mass. Now, you could do that with a wormhole, or to create a wormhole. You could have lots of mass and lots of energy, and you could actually bend space and time, pull it down, but you'd need something on the other side to go the other way to actually join those 2 points together. And that's why you might need negative mass to join those 2 points. Currently, again, this is just theoretical. These things might not link the same point even in a galaxy or a universe. They might actually link different universes together. Now, that's all getting, very theoretical and very out there. But I find that, incredibly exciting that we could actually investigate other universes where the laws of physics might be different.
First things first, holy shit, science communication sucks. This is so dumbed down that it's both wrong and doesn't explain anything really. I really like the part where he said that wormholes break the speed of light. It's like entering a marathon, completely cutting through the course and finishing the race in 5 minutes, then claiming to have the marathon world record. It's just wrong. And that's not to mention the weird mix of science fiction speculation. He's not necessarily wrong on anything, but you shouldn't have physicists mixing personal speculation with actual mathematical is a word. But you shouldn't have physicists mixing personal speculation with actual mathematical equations, because that just leaves so much room for miscommunication to happen. The sad thing is that I go through all this effort to show every way that answer A is wrong, and yet this one animation is all that's really necessary to disprove option A. So what's the correct answer? This whole video, I haven't really taken a proper stance. I've just kind of been saying it's not A. So is it B? Is it C? Is it F? Is it G? It's none. The question is wrong. Portals cannot exist if they don't move in tandem. I'm not just talking about the video game either. The maths just doesn't work if the portals move relative to each other. But holes in space can move separate to each other in this question. So what answer breaks the least amount of physics? I think option D, the option where the cube enters the orange portal and never exits out the other side, sucked into some sort of singularity, makes the most sense. Because I feel like singularities are the answer that we have to when things stop making sense, right? Black holes don't make sense, singularity. This other thing doesn't make sense, fuck it, make it a singularity. That's what I think with portals, right? Well, if it came out, that would be fucking weird. So maybe it just doesn't come out at all. Singularity. Boom. Listen, video's done, I'm finished. I'm gonna turn you off.
A wormhole is a theoretical bridge between 2 points in space that are very far apart.
Are you familiar with the Einstein-Rosen bridge? Speak English, please. It posits that the singularity at the heart of a black hole may be strong enough to break through to another point in the universe. Those words make you sound smart, but I'm still not getting it. Okay, how do I explain this like you're 5 years old? Imagine the universe is this piece of paper. Okay. What we do is bend the universe to put these 2 points together. Now stick a pencil through it to really hammer home your point. This should leave the audience with no questions at all.